Vote Rejoin EU.
Vote Rejoin EU.
Two contrasting analyses have emerged of the meeting earlier this week between Keir Starmer and representatives of the European Union. One, prominently and vociferously represented by the Eurosceptic press, has been that the agreement come to last Monday was a betrayal of Brexit. It sets the United Kingdom back firmly on the road of rejoining the European Union. It ensures that the United Kingdom is once again under the thrall of Brussels. The contrasting view, understandably put about by Keir Starmer and his supporters, is that the agreement of Monday was an attempt to make Brexit work. It was a reset of the relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom, which had been so sullied and so destroyed by the incompetence of the preceding Conservative government. A phrase which is used frequently is that the adults are back in the room, and that a realistic and pragmatic approach has been adopted by the Labour Party, the Labour government, to relations with the European Union. Both of these analyses are wrong. They share the common thread that both of them exaggerate the importance of what was agreed. Let's look in more detail at why they're both wrong, and we'll see that there are similarities and differences between the reasons which have led them to be wrong. It's perhaps easier to see why the Eurosceptic analysis is wrong. The United Kingdom hasn't rejoined the single market. It hasn't become part of the customs union. Freedom of movement hasn't been guaranteed. Many of the issues that are pointed to in this agreement haven't yet been nailed down in firm terms, and will be further negotiations that will have to decide what degree of movement the United Kingdom actually makes towards the European Union. We ask ourselves, why is it that the Eurosceptic press have adopted so unbalanced and so hostile a tone, as if Starmer, who's made it clear that he doesn't want to relitigate the issues of Brexit, were attempting to undermine Brexit? I think there are three reasons. The first one is that the Eurosceptic press know that there's a certain audience which likes to be told how appallingly the United Kingdom is treated by the European Union. Words like surrender and giving way and concession are always bandied around with an underlying tone of rage and disappointment and distress. So that's in the comfort zone, if you will, of the Eurosceptic press. I think also they're attempting to fire warning shots across Starmer's bow. That's for nothing, now don't do it. Any attempts, however small, to get back into the European Union will be fought with all the might of the Eurosceptic press, and that's a warning to Starmer. The third reason, which I think is in some ways the most interesting one, is that deep down, the Eurosceptics know that Brexit has failed, and that the United Kingdom has no choice but gradually to move back towards the European Union. Any discussion of the European Union and our relationship with it brings the day closer where people in this country come to the conclusion that the only rational way out of the impasse that Brexit has created is to rejoin the European Union. And obviously that's something which the Eurosceptic press find very, very difficult to swallow or to articulate or to recognise. But their baffled rage, I think, does speak volumes about their underlying uncertainty about the future and security of their project. Brexit is a very fragile construct, and it can't stand much in the way of variation or criticism. From Starmer's point of view, there's an equally misleading narrative which is being put around. The small changes which have been brought about in the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union can't in any sense be described as a reset. They're tinkering at the edges, they're honing off some of the rougher edges of the appalling Brexit deal, which Boris Johnson, for his own selfish and politically motivated reasons, endorsed in 2019 and 2020. there are a number of things which, if they came about in the succeeding negotiations, would be helpful to British individuals. There's a possibility of a youth mobility scheme. There's a possibility that it will be easier to travel. And there's the possibility that it will be easier to make exports, particularly in the phytosanitary field, to continental Europe. All that is positive. But in the same way, as I mentioned a moment ago, that we're not rejoining the customs union, we're not rejoining the single market, we're not having freedom of movement, the essential pillars of the European Union, its institutional structure, remain something to which the United Kingdom is not at all willing to commit itself at this stage. And until that happens, there won't be any fundamental change in the economic and political relations between the United Kingdom and the European Union. There are understandable political reasons why Starmer is talking up to an exaggerated extent his achievements in all the negotiations that he's been carrying on in the past few weeks. India, America, the European Union, a trinity of success as he presents it. There are difficulties which he's confronting within his party, relation to the rest of public opinion, which have obviously proved much more difficult and intractable than he hoped. He's a very unpopular Prime Minister, and the ascent of the Reform Party has made a dent in the self-confidence of the Labour Party, which is manifest. And one of the ways in which he hopes to be able to meet the reform challenge is toughening his rhetoric on migration, which he did in the week before the agreement with the EU, and insisting that this reset, as he calls it, is not one that goes beyond the red lines that he set himself and the red lines of the Eurosceptics. That's largely true. There is one interesting exception. In the area of phytosanitary products, Keir Starmer has had to accept what's called dynamic alignment, that in future British law will change in tandem and in lockstep with European law in order to make it easier for our exporters, our agricultural exporters, to have access to the European market. This choice by Starmer, this trade-off that he's made, is really at the heart of the Brexit argument, although it's not by any means the exaggeratedly important aspect of the negotiations that some Eurosceptics presented it as being. But it does, in a small way, illustrate the choice which you have to make in dealing with the European Union between alignment and economic damage which you're doing to them yourselves. Our food producers have been very, very positive in welcoming the arrangement that Keir Starmer has come to. They know that the sovereignty which supposedly has been given up to Brussels on setting food standards is largely illusory. The United Kingdom has largely been willing to follow European examples, and that isn't going to change very much in the future. But you can't have your cake and eat it. And the fact that Starmer has had to accept dynamic alignment in order to guarantee or make easier British access to the European market is very, very illuminating. I think it was a rational choice on his part, but it does bring out the futility and the absurdity of the idea that you sometimes get on both sides of the European argument in this country, that you can get something for nothing. By banging the table louder, you'll be able to force foreigners to cave in. That simply isn't correct. I think that the Eurosceptics who accused Starmer of being a Remainer have got their head screwed on entirely the wrong way. We know from things he said during the election and things he said since that Starmer is very eager to avoid any further discussion of rejoining the European Union. But I think he won't be able indefinitely, if this Labour government wends its way on, to be able to stick on that minimalist position. there have been many opinion polls showing that British electorate is suffering significant buyer's remorse from Brexit. We also have to ask ourselves whether the much vaunted commitment to economic growth, which supposedly is going to be the panacea for all the country's social and economic problems, whether that can be attained without a much closer relationship with the European Union. We're sometimes told that joining the single market or joining the customs union would be major steps towards rejoining the European Union. I personally doubt whether those steps are realistic in isolation. I think it would be politically and economically very strange indeed to attempt to play grandmother's steps by joining the European Union gradually, the single market and the customs union. We'd find ourselves perhaps in the worst of all worlds of having to do what to some extent Keir Starmer has had to do in these negotiations, which is accept standards set by others in which we have no role in their formation. I think to reiterate that that's the fundamental problem about being on the borders of the European Union. You're going to be greatly influenced by the European Union, and the best way to influence the European Union is to be part of it. There are some hopeful commentators who said that they think that Starmer's negotiations and agreement may be the first step on a road back to rejoining the European Union. I don't think that's Starmer's goal. I think he regards rejoining the European Union as being, as he said, something that may or may not take place beyond his own physical, not even political lifetime. Well, if you're someone who, like me, like the people in the Rejoin EU party, think it's much more urgent than that, it's not a matter of 20 or 30 years. We see that economically and politically, the United Kingdom is suffering from Brexit. We don't see any reason why that should continue. We think that it will be possible and desirable for Keir Starmer and other political parties, British political parties, to be much more bold and much more outspoken in their commitment to rejoining, not merely as something in the remote future, but something that should be worked towards now. That's what the Rejoin EU party is here for. That's what we're all about. And we hope that as time goes on, there will be more and more people, more and more voters and commentators who will come to see that rejoining the European Union is the only way of solving the problems of Brexit.
Vote Rejoin EU. Join the EU vision.